Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome to Devs in the Sheds. We've got a fun episode today lined up. Lupcho has joined us. For all the newcomers, my name's Matthew Coles. I'm a technical account manager at AWS. I work out of Melbourne, Australia. Paul, would you like to introduce yourself to everyone?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Paul Kukiel, solution architect, work out of Melbourne, Australia as well. Really beautiful day today, a little bit warm, so I can hear the birds going on in the background. Hopefully, there's not too many neighbours out that are doing some whippersnippering or mowing. And special guest today, Lupcho. Like, introduce yourself and tell us about what you're going to be doing today.
Name's Joe Traversky. I've been with AWS for about 2 years. I work in professional services as a cloud architect. I actually started in AWS in the training and certification space and moved into cloud architecture about 6 months ago. So today,
very nice. Go ahead, Lupcho, sorry.
No worries. I was just saying, today I was just going to show you guys through a project that I've kind of just been working on in my garage and, half on AWS, half on my garage. I don't have a shed, so I'm just working from a corner.
Garage, shed, cabin, it's all okay.
So so this is pretty much a project I was working on. I've been kind of building up my own little mini data center in sort of the corner of my garage. I'll just show you around, but I don't actually have anywhere to work in my garage. So I'm just like turned the back of my ute into a standing desk, the world's most uncomfortable standing desk. So, and then I've just if I can sort of show you guys around. Oh, we'll see if I can. Is that
We'll
working?
bring that one up.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, let me change the view for everyone. I will get these cameras sorted.
Where's everybody else from today? Do we have anyone else from Melbourne or a couple of international guests this week?
So that's some serious equipment you've got there. It's on the big screen now.
Oh, cool. Okay, I'll see if I can flick this around so I can see it properly.
Yeah, that's good.
What I've been building out here is a little sort of mini data center with here, it's kind of behind all of the cables and some power packs, but I've got a Cisco router there that's connected to my site-to-site VPN. And then under that, if I move away some of these cables, there I've got my collection of Raspberry Pis just mounted up in a Utronics Ultimate rack. Mm-hmm. And then if I kind of swing underneath, you can just see all of the Raspberry Pis are kind of mounted underneath. So not sure how well that's coming up on the video, but hopefully you can kind of get the gist of what's going on here.
So do you have 3 Raspberry Pis there?
Yeah, I've got 3 there. I've still got space for one more. So one right there. So this one here was actually my VMware cluster. Doing some VMware projects. So I've just converted that into my Kubernetes master at the moment. So at some point I'll chuck in a 4th one and turn that into the VMware cluster. And then I'm sure I'll have some other, VMware-based project.
Are they Raspberry Pi 3s or 4s?
At the moment, I'm running the 4B 8 gigs. So I've got a total of 32 gig of RAM in there. The middle 2 nodes are the worker nodes. And then I've got the first one is the cluster node or the master node. So I'm not running anything on the master node, but if I want, I could sort of disable the taint, and then I'd be able to use that as opposed to.
Yeah. Before we go on and ask some more questions, like talking about like Raspberry Pis and a mini data center, like in the last week, I was just showing Matt before, I got the Raspberry Pi Pico. So I'm not sure if anybody's looked at the Raspberry Pi Pico. So I bought one of those. And here you can see, like, I wrote a really simple application. It's turning this LED on and off. It's just a blink timer. That's connected like completely like off, but connected by a little USB battery pack. So I don't know. Has anybody played with the Raspberry Pi Pico and built anything interesting?
What's the idea behind the Pico, Paul? Out of interest, like what makes it different from other Raspberry Pis, I guess?
Yeah, it's much more like an Arduino, so some sort of like embedded controller. So it it doesn't have, like a Linux operating system running on top of it. But the really great thing about this is like if you use Arduino, you're basically writing a language that's like C++ or C. It's a different kind of language. Whereas for Pico, it's supported like MicroPython. So everything, it's super easy. You can go ahead and install libraries and run Python on it and deploy Python to it. And it was actually like really easy. You basically download the IDE. Maybe I'll show that IDE really quickly.
Yeah, let's pop it up for like a couple of seconds. I'm really interested in this. And like, what's the difference between Python and MicroPython, right? Like, is it Python with a cut down version of like the standard libraries, or?
Yeah, basically it's that. So you can install like different libraries and things on it. There's a package manager to be able to do that. I just think I'm not exactly sure about what it comes down to and what's different. I mean, I'll assume that there'll be certain things that don't run on it. And I imagine that, like the actual underlying compute of this device is probably pretty weak. But like, so you basically go ahead and you pick where you want to go ahead and run that. If you had multiple Picos plugged in. So I'll plug it into my USB now and we'll see that pop up. Yep. So basically, the first time you do it, you put it in a USB storage mode. So you plug it into your computer, you hold the button down, comes up as USB storage mode. You get into Thonny, you find the Pico in here, and it basically bootstraps the device. From that point on, you can just plug it in. And so we can see here that's been selected. And then I'll go ahead and write some Python code. And we can see the light is blinking pretty rapidly. Maybe I'll go ahead and I'll change that frequency to 1.
Yep.
Save on that.
There's a really cool project my son has been asked me to work on where you can use the Raspberry Pi Pico and connect it to a piano. If you've got like a digital piano with a MIDI out, and you can run that into a Pico and then set up an LED light strip on top of the piano keys so that as you press the keys, the MIDI output will light up whichever key you just pressed. Which pretty much like if you follow any of the sort of YouTube piano guys, that's how they build out their kind of like their demo videos.
Okay,
nice.
Cool.
Yeah, that sounds...
I also bought the e-paper module so that I can have text display or scrolling text and those sorts of things on it. But so basically, like as you saw, like I just changed the timer frequency just to slow down the blink. I've saved that. Like if I was to like stop this application running, it's stuck in a funny state now because it's plugged in the middle. But if I disconnect that from my computer, plug it back into the battery pack, we'll see that like that will it basically boots in like less than a second, and it will just go ahead and run that program. As long as the program is main.py, it'll go ahead and execute that program and kick off. I just got this a couple of days ago. This was the second program I wrote. I got a new laptop, an M1, and was setting that up. So I've lost this was the second program I wrote. I got a new laptop, an M1, was setting that up. So I've lost this was the second program I wrote. I got a new laptop, an M1.
And we've got a bit of an echo. There we go.
This was the second program I wrote. I got a new laptop, an M1.
And we've got a bit of an echo. There we go.
This was the second program I wrote. I got a new laptop, an M1.
And we've got a bit of an echo. So nice. Cool.
That is Lupcho. That is Lupcho. He's allowing us to feedback on ourselves.
That's okay. That was hilariously good. I wonder if anyone in the audience enjoyed that. And Mookie Monkey, it's good to see you on again. Yeah.
All right. Well, I'll unmute you, Lupcho, and we'll go back into your project and you can kick it off. All right. Well, I'll unmute you, Lupcho, and we'll go.
There we go. Cool. Perfect. Do you want to come off loop, Lupcho, and we'll let you run for it, and then hopefully. Do you want to come off loop, Lupcho, and we'll let you run. Live streaming, there's always risk, right? Live
feedback loop now.
Yep, the headphones should fix it up. And Paul, you're on mute now. I think you can come off mute if you want.
Yep, thanks. That was pretty funny.
Lupcho, you're on mute now again. You got to love live streams, right? So, okay, we're looking better.
I was going to say we almost made the track for the new M1 CPU launch. Yeah, the video at the start, the guy making the music with the random Apple sounds.
Yep.
Just we've uninvertedly made art.
That's it.
Nice.
Yeah,
So let's have a look at what you've got, right? Like I've taken down Paul's screen. It looks like we're fully functioning with audio again. Tell us a little more in terms of like the solution that you've created, what it was, why you did it, and very interested to see the setup and I think you've got some live elements as well you want to show off to everyone, right?
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Like I'll just bring it up. Give me just 1 second. I'll just I don't want to do the whole PowerPoint presentation thing. But essentially what I wanted to try and build was a kind of like a mock way of creating a kind of semi-enterprise data center for under $1,500. Like see if you could actually create something that was an equivalent of a hybrid cloud without spending, fortunes of dollars, right? So essentially I kind of figured if I wanted to create something that was going to be like a hybrid cloud, I would need to have some an AWS component. I would need to have some compute on the AWS side and some compute on the hybrid side. Create something that was almost like an enterprise network between the two, and then basically see if I can get an application to work across both, and be able to fail over seamlessly between AWS and my hybrid cloud, or my $1,500 hybrid cloud, which is kind of from a professional services perspective, we kind of figured that, this is typically what customers would be doing, where they've got their own data center and they're going to have some stuff on AWS, and they're probably going to have some applications on AWS and some in their own data centers. So just trying to build out something that's similar to what our customers would be doing. I'll see if I can just bring up this see if I can bring up this diagram just to sort of give people a rough idea. If I can share my screen, just bear with me 1 sec. Okay. Share screen.
And I think Paul's just asked the audience, anyone running a personal Kubernetes cluster, let us know in the chat.
All right.
Yeah, I've done it before across a couple of like older laptops, and you learn a lot about Kubernetes when you do it from scratch yourself.
Yeah, there's like building Kubernetes clusters. I tried to follow the Hardware guide doing this. So for anyone that's old enough to remember the Hardware guide, it was basically the original way to launch a Kubernetes cluster. It took like 3 years to read through the documentation and to understand it. So I thought, look, I'm going to build this out. Hopefully you can see what's on my screen at this point. Yeah.
Not yet. The screen sharing hasn't come up. I'll put it up as soon as it does pop up.
Oh, let me try that.
And so Learn Kubernetes the Hard Way, is that like a variation on like Learn Python the Hard Way? I remember that book quite well.
Is that, are you talking about Kelsey Hightower's guide?
Kelsey Hightower's, I think he does some presentations about how to build it the hard way, but there used to be an actual page which was called the Hard Way Guide on the Kubernetes documentation page. It's actually a 404 now, because I went back and checked it back when I was when I was working for a bank a few years back. I tried to build a CloudFormation template to sort of build out a hardware guide and automate it. And I used that guide to sort of create the automation for it. And then when I went to go back and check it a few months ago, I found out that they've completely removed the hardware guide. And now there's a whole bunch of better ways to create Kubernetes clusters. I think AWS even has a half a dozen better ways of creating a Kubernetes cluster. But the hardware guide was kind of the original way of, doing it by scratch. So I've kind of followed that. Hopefully you can see my screen now. So kind of what I've got here is the AWS half of my network, and the on-prem side of my network. So on the on-prem side of my network, I've just got like a simple sort of /24 CIDR just a 192.168.1.0.
Yep.
And here I'm basically just running the Kubernetes cluster, like nothing else. And then on the AWS side, I've got another Kubernetes cluster that's running on EKS. And I've got some RDS instances. And I've got here, I've got a transit gateway with the gateway attachment that connects to the AWS VPC. And then I've got a site-to-site VPN that connects to my Cisco. I'm using a Cisco RV345P, which is just like it's kind of like an entry-level Cisco router. I think it's about $700 worth at the moment. So, and that supports AWS site-to-site VPN, although as generic, not an automated fashion. And it also allows you to do power over Ethernet. So you can power some Raspberry Pis if you've got the hat. And then here, all I'm doing is basically creating a Route 53 weighted record set, one that connects to the load balancer that's connected through to my EKS cluster, and one that's connected to a network load balancer. And then the network load balancer forwards traffic over the gateway attachment, over the transit gateway through to the Raspberry Pi. And then the Raspberry Pi uses that transit gateway to connect to the multi-AZ RDS instance. So I thought I'll just take you through, hopefully this is launched okay. So I've built this out in AP Southeast 2 in the Sydney region. I'm in Geelong, so that's my closest one. But I thought I'd just build out a second copy of this in the that's not what I wanted. Oh no, that one's it. So I've got this in AP Southeast 2 and it's functional in AP Southeast 2. But what I thought I'd do is just to show you guys kind of how it works is I've built it out in which region? North Virginia. So in North Virginia, I've built out 2 stacks and I've copied all of this code through to the Git repository so you can share out the links. But basically, I've got three stacks here, one for AWS VPC, and that's just built out my my VPC and all of my route tables and NACLs and stuff like that. I've built out another stack here for the WordPress deployment that also puts out the network load balancer that I use to forward traffic to the Raspberry Pis. And then I've just created another stack here for the transit gateway. And I thought that's what I'd show you kind of how to set this up. And then here you see some stacks for the Kubernetes cluster that I've spun up in US West. Sorry, just get the name right. US East 1. I don't work in this region too often, and that's just spun up using EKS CTL. And all of the code for that is just in the repository all in CloudFormation, so nothing too fancy there. So with my transit gateway stack, I thought I'd just go straight into showing you how all of this is configured. So with my transit gateway stack, I've built out a transit gateway. I've also just configured the transit gateway with a site-to-site VPN connection. Now, the way this works in the repository, I'm just going to show you this, is basically what I've done is just created a little shell script that sort of spits out all of the resources for the CloudFormation template and done a curl of my IP address using check IP and just pass that through to create the site-to-site VPN. And then the rest of it is just the standard CloudFormation template that builds a transit gateway and the site-to-site VPN. So on this side here, I've got this transit gateway and my site-to-site VPN. And then if I jump through to the transit gateway menu, I should see, hopefully I've got a site-to-site VPN in this space.
So when you've created that site-to-site VPN, you still need to get the certificates and install them onto your device, right?
Yeah, look, you can generally use certificates if you want to use that method for authentication. I'm going to be really lazy and actually just use pre-shared keys, and I'll just cut and paste the pre-shared keys. So you guys will all see my credentials, but you won't have my IP address. So, you know, hopefully my tunnel will be relatively secure. But just basically just to see how it gets created. So this is my site-to-site VPN, and all I needed to really do to this is basically, and the CloudFormation template does all of this. So I've got my transit gateway. I deleted one this morning and I've still got the available one. And then that transit gateway has some attachments, and it basically just attaches to, make sure I've got the right one. So I've got an attachment to my VPC, and then I've got an attachment to my VPN, and the transit gateway will just route any traffic between the VPN and the VPC. Now I've created it, but I haven't actually connected it to my router yet. So what I thought I'd do is take you through the process for that. So if I go through to transit gateway, site-to-site VPN, and the first thing I do is just need to set up the tunnel details with the source and the destination. So I'll just modify the VPN. Nope, wrong option. Sorry, modify the VPN connection options.
I might also get you the Zoom in as well, Lupcho. We did have somebody say that they were finding it hard to just Command plus on your keyboard or Control plus.
Oh, sorry. Hang on, let me do that.
Yeah, that way, yeah, that's much better. So it's readable for everyone. Lakshmi asks, is this the first part of the series? We basically air at 12 p.m. AEST time each week, different topic each week. What I'll do is I'll just post, we use YouTube as the archive. So if you want to watch some previous episodes, it's available on our YouTube. Twitch keeps them for 14 days as well on the AWS channel. But you can go ahead and kind of watch what we've done previously or dial in same time each week, and we'll have a different topic each time. How are we looking, Lupcho? I'll go back to you.
Okay, cool. So with the site-to-site VPN, as soon as I create it, AWS will create 2 external tunnels for me on public IP addresses. So all I need to do is basically just configure the Cisco part of my connection. So I'll jump into my Cisco router, and I'm just going to grab some details from my Cisco connection. Just remember my password.
So this is the same setup that I used when I did the IoT demo, except rather than using a Cisco router, I was using StrongSwan on Raspberry Pi. Yeah, I don't have an actual device that you have. So it's probably a lot easier for you than it was for me.
Yeah, StrongSwan's actually pretty cool. Especially if you want to build out something yourself and not pay a ton of money for it. I kind of like physical networking equipment. I don't know, networking is my happy place, so I don't mind spending some money on a good router. But yeah, like if you want to build something for yourself, StrongSwan's pretty awesome. So from here, I've just logged into my Cisco router, and all I need to do is configure the on-premise side of my tunnel. So I've built out my VPC with like a 20.0.0.0 connection in US Southeast 2. Sorry, US East 1. Sorry, got to remember the right region when I'm working in the US. So I'm just going to add firstly, I'm just going to add a new static route so that it knows where to send the traffic, so it can communicate back to AWS. So I'll create a new route. I'm just going to make this 255.0.0. And I just got to set this to the next hop of my VPN connection. And the VPN isn't actually in place yet, but when it is in place, the routing will be in place for it. So next step, I go back to VPN, site-to-site VPN, and I've already got one in place for the 10.10 network. So that's for my Australian network when this loads. So I've already got this, although that would be better if it was up. Hopefully it still works and I don't have to fix it live on air. But that's for the Australian side of the connection, so we'll have to try and get that working. On the American side of the connection, I'll show you how to just establish one of these tunnels. So first thing I need to do is just download the configuration, and I'm just going to set this to generic because Cisco is actually supported, but I don't have one of the supported models. So I'll just go to generic and just grab out the generic version of the configuration template. And then out of there, I can pretty much grab all of the details for the pre-shared key. So I'll grab that. Actually, before I grab that, I'll grab the tunnel details and I'll just show you how to configure the tunnel. So I'll grab the first IP address. We'll go back to the Cisco login page, create a new site-to-site VPN. I'm just going to call this AWS US 1. I'll set the profile to Amazon Web Services, WAN IP, static IP for the endpoint, and just put in the remote endpoint. And I just also need to put it in as the remote identifier down here. Then I need to grab the pre-shared key from that file. So I'll just grab this from here, copy, pre-shared key. And then I just need to set up the local and the remote side of the connectivity. So just pump in my local CIDR address, /24, 255.255.255.0. And then I'll put in the remote side of the connection, which is 20.0.0.0 and 255.255.0.0. And I'll close that off. And then I should be able to do that. Normally I could set up a failover so that it goes out to the second tunnel if it fails, but for the sake of time, I'll just keep this and I'll enable a TCP keep alive. So I'll hit apply on that. And then hopefully we should be able to establish this tunnel.
So how many people could probably do this at home, right? Like I know a lot of the higher end personal routers, you could potentially set this up on. But I also know like right here, you've got the heavy duty gear, right? Like you've got the Cisco routers in the background.
Yeah, I think I've heard that I heard you can do it with some of the Ubiquity routers. Although I think with the Ubiquity ones, you got to be careful with like the PoE settings because I've heard they can burn out Raspberry Pis. But like really, like this router that's my model there. It's actually not on the supported list as far as AWS like site-to-site VPNs. But from the Cisco documentation, it had a profile for AWS. There's people on the internet that were saying that it was capable of connecting to a site-to-site VPN on AWS. So, and there's smaller versions of it. So I've got the sort of 16-port version, which is one of the bigger RV series. But if you get one of the smaller RVs, I think like the 160, they're only about $200 to $300, and I think they also support site-to-site VPNs, but they only have like 3 or 4 ports. So, but look, there's where there's a will, there's a way, right? Like as I said, you can always use like Strong Swan or something like that if you want to go down that path.
Yeah, it would totally. It worked with Strong Swan on a Pi Zero, and the Pi Zero was like $17 or something. So if you wanted to do that setup, you could do that. However, the difference was on throughput. So the Pi 4 versus the Pi Zero was probably like a fair bit more throughput. Yeah. So if I was trying to like copy files up or down, I noticed that it was significantly slower on the Pi Zero. But I mean, for this, it worked fine. And I was able to do what you're going to do, like basically from on-premise query a RDS database in AWS. It worked just fine. You couldn't tell. But if you were copying a large file, it was a little bit slower.
Yeah. So now that I've done that, I kind of have to just wait for this tunnel to come up. Although I did hit like 10.0.0.0 when I modified the VPN setting. So I should have typed in 20.0.0.0. So I'm probably going to have to modify that again before it connects. So I guess in the meantime, I'll kind of just launch some Kubernetes services and then we'll flick over to the Australian version and we'll see if we can get the Australian version to work. But essentially, just following what I did in the repository, like on my, I won't show you my kube config, but basically what I've done is I've set up 3 clusters. So and I'll zoom in a bit here so you can kind of see this, but I'll just cat my bash profile. But basically just set up like 3 clusters. So my production cluster, my dev cluster, and then my Raspberry Pi cluster. And I just use aliases in bash to actually flick between my 3 clusters. So if I want to click off to my production cluster, so I can just, basically just type in the command, hang on, source. Hopefully that works. Now I should be connected to my production cluster. So just make sure everything's working. All right. Yeah, so the cluster's up. So I'll just launch up a server so that I can actually connect to it. So in that same repository, I've created just a sample WordPress deployment, and I've got the Docker file in there to be able to just create a Alpine Linux WordPress deployment. So I've got
So the database for WordPress is RDS, but okay, yep.
Yeah, so I've got a WordPress database in there. I've just got this username and password stored up in a secrets file, and I've just got that in my home directory, and I've applied it to my Kubernetes cluster. So you could also use something like Secrets Manager to store the RDS instance credentials. I've got to put in the right credential because that's pointing at the AU database. So I'll just grab the American. Hopefully this will start to connect, but I'll grab the American RDS DNS name. So just bear with me 1 sec. I feel like everything takes longer when you've actually got people watching.
No, nobody notices. Everyone's following along anyway. How's everyone finding
the
the
session? The time
so
goes quicker.
Yeah.
So I'll just grab this endpoint and hopefully this will work. Now I'll grab that and throw it into my WordPress deployment file. So I've got it here in the hybrid Kubernetes directory. So WordPress service, I should probably spell AWS correctly. And I'm just going to put in the right load, not the service file, just in that file there. So I'm just going to put the right RDS file in there. And I should be able to deploy this. So let's have a go at deploying this on our American Kubernetes cluster. TTL apply space -f WordPress YAML.
There's a question there from Michael Black. So EKS can now run natively without the need for VMware. So do you want to answer that, Lupcho?
EKS anywhere can run without VMware?
Yes, so I'm guessing like we should probably clarify that because there's EKS distro and there's EKS anywhere.
Yeah, there's EKS distro, which I believe is what can run on any. I was about to say anywhere, but that was going to confuse things further. But yeah, EKS distro you can run without VMware, and then EKS anywhere is dependent on VMware. As of a few days ago is what I heard. So hopefully that information is still accurate as of today.
Yeah, that's right. So if you want to run EKS on premise, you need to run that on top of VMware at the moment. So that's where it is. So the whilst we are running Kubernetes anywhere, and by anywhere I mean you're at your house, that is not running EKS anywhere at your house.
Yeah, I'm not running EKS anywhere at my house. I've actually just in the repository, if you kind of want to do this at home, I've actually just created a folder here with a README file. And I've actually just taken you through like the step-to-step guide on how to build out Kubernetes for yourself. So what I've done here, I've actually based this on Ubuntu 20. So if you want with Ubuntu 20, like you can pretty much just follow this guide, insert your own network details where you've got any problems. But for the most part, this should work. I've also just used my own host name and my own IP address details. But if you follow this guide, this will install Docker for you. It'll install Kubernetes. I've set up the log drivers for Docker, and then I've also sort of configured what you need to get Calico working. So Calico just as the overlay CNI. And that's just built on like the latest version of Kubernetes. And then once you get to the end of the guide, just in that file, I've kind of built out a little sample application using Node.js. So you don't have to use that sample application, but if you want to follow along and just have something, just a little sort of Docker file that you can build for yourself and push it to Docker Hub and then, or ECR, and then just run this application on your own cluster. So I thought that would be useful to just like follow along rather than trying to, figure out how to build the Kubernetes cluster on the Raspberry Pis, because I'd say it probably did take me a few weeks of messing around before I could actually get the cluster working. So hopefully this README makes life a little bit easier for you.
Yeah, we discussed earlier that setting it up from home is a good experience, but I probably reformatted each machine 3 or 4 times at least before I got it to work properly.
I don't know how many times I had to reformat my SD cards, because I originally started building this on Ubuntu 21. And I had a lot of issues with Ubuntu 21, and I ended up just using the LTS version of Ubuntu 20. So I'd recommend doing that. For whatever reason, Ubuntu 21 just didn't want to play nice with core DNS. And so I just, went back to good old Ubuntu 20. All right, so let's have a look at this. So I should be able to now create the service. I'm just going to make sure my WordPress service is up and running. So hopefully I've got some Docker containers running. So yeah, Docker containers. Now just got to build myself a load balancer. So kubectl apply space -f WordPress. And I just want to grab the right file.
I just shared out that link, but I realized it didn't pop it into LinkedIn. So Michael, I'm just going to attach it to the stream that Paul has running on LinkedIn, so you can kind of have a look through the Kubernetes guide if you want to.
So this is creating the service or the load balancer for your EKS cluster for that specific pod, which will be different when you set it up for on-premise.
Yeah, so on the on-premise cluster, so I've now set it up so that it has the WordPress service running, and I've just created a load balancer in front of that running on port 80. So if I go back to my on-premise version, so I'll just make sure this is working. It does take a little while to like spin up the load balancer, but hopefully at some point you should see something that looks like a WordPress website pop up. On the on-premise side, if I just run pi-k8s, that will flick me over to my on-premise Kubernetes cluster. And then I can just do kubectl cluster-info. And I've now got my Bluetooth trying to connect. And I've now got my on-premise Kubernetes cluster configured. So what I've done for that is I've actually just run this in the namespace, in the dev namespace. So kubectl get all space minus namespace dev. So I haven't actually run a load balancer on premise. So I was thinking about using something like MetalLB, but for now what I've done is I've just actually defined a node port and just defined a static node port. So on 30,000. So if I curl that load balance, I'll curl this port. It'll be accessible on all 3 nodes, on the master and the 2 worker nodes. And what I've actually done for the on-premise cluster is I've actually just forwarded the NLB to connect on that port. So if I jump back to the AWS region in Australia, or if I can find it in the, let's see if I actually did manage to get this cluster or this VPN to configure in the US region. Still looks like it's down, which probably means because I modified it. I modified it incorrectly. Let me just fix that to a 20 and see if I can get that to connect properly. Hopefully Telstra didn't change my IP address. One of the problems I have is that I'm not actually on a static IP address on my NBN connection. So every once in a while, the way this works is it connects through to a customer gateway, and the customer gateway has a fixed IP address. So as soon as Telstra changes my static IP address, then my VPN tunnel drops and I have to go and basically repopulate it. If you're using the CloudFormation template, you can just update the parameter that sets the customer gateway, and then that will rebuild the VPN connection with the new static IP. But hopefully that didn't actually happen. But once a day I get a new IP address and I have to do this all again. So fun times with Telstra.
Yeah, I definitely recommend having a static IP, right, for home if you were to do this experiment and want something online for multiple days. It depends on what you're running, right? Like if you can survive 30 minutes of downtime or not. If it's just a hobby project, of course, but if you want to do something serious, even if it's for fun, static IP.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And it's only like $5 as well, right? Like I remember when it used to be free, and then now all the telcos are charging about $5, but it's still pretty reasonable. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm saving you money on DHCP. Why can't you give me a free static IP address? So essentially the way this works with the hybrid cluster, so I'll just show you what I've built out, and then hopefully we can get this VPN tunnel back up and running. I was hoping that we wouldn't have any problems, but live demos, things always go wrong, right? So I'm in the North Virginia region, and I've got the same kind of thing set up in the Australian region, but in North Virginia, I've just created, essentially I've got one classic load balancer, and that goes out to the EKS cluster. So if I look at that there, it's basically just forwarding traffic to local EC2 instances that are running in the EKS cluster. And then if I look at the WordPress load balancer, which is a network load balancer, it still runs on AWS with Elastic interfaces that are assigned of kind of out of the VPC. But instead of forwarding to local machines, basically what it's doing is it's forwarding to IP targets. And then those targets forward back to the IP addresses of my Raspberry Pi. And they're all showing up as unhealthy because that VPN tunnel is down right now. But if the VPN tunnel was up, hey, they should be healthy. So let me just flick over to Australia and we can see if it's working in Australia. It was working an hour before we started, so hopefully it's still working. But
so this is the exact when we demoed it a couple of weeks ago, and I went through really quickly, the exact same setup that I run as well, except you're using network load balancer, I was using application load balancer. I also have my IP address change every few days, and I just got a script that detects whether my IP has changed, and if it has, it just goes ahead and updates the gateway and reprovisions it for me.
Yeah,
I used to do that with DynDNS for a while, but I invested this month in a static IP for a project. So that's helpful. But DynDNS doesn't really help you in VPN type scenarios, right? Like it was more like I was hosting a website from home, and I had a domain name attached to that, and I wanted to make sure that like there was minimal downtime, only a few seconds every time my IP changed.
Yeah. Well, it looks like we're going to have to do some sort of live troubleshooting now, because this is definitely down in Australia. And it was like Australia was like my TV chef version of, this is one that I prepared earlier. This is the one that was going to work if the US one didn't work. So, but now it looks like fortuitously my Australian one has gone down. So now I'm going to have to do some sort of troubleshooting on the Australian one. So let's see if I can try and figure out why this is actually broken. So if I flick over to my site-to-site VPN here, I should have, so transit gateway. Oh, that one, new window. So if I go to transit gateway, the transit gateway should have, transit gateway is available, which is good. And I should have some attachments to that transit gateway. So make sure I get the transit gateway that's actually online right now. I might just have to zoom out a little bit so I can see which ones are deleted. So I've got my transit gateway. It looks like I've got two attachments, one to the VPC, one to the VPN, and both of those are available. So I'm just going to check the transit gateway route tables, and hopefully I'll have two associations. So I've got an association to the VPC and the VPN. That looks good. Make sure I've got my routes in place. So I've got I'm in Virginia. Sorry. That's probably not why. All right, let me actually make sure I'm in the right region. Go again. So I'll go to my Transit Gateway route table. Make sure I've got my right route table. Got two associations, VPN and VPC. And make sure I've got my static routes. So I've got a static route to 10.0. And it looks like I've got a static route out to a VPN, which is showing up as a black hole, which probably just means that the VPN tunnel is down. So let's go and have a look at the VPN. So to site VPN connection and tunnel details. It looks like it's down. So let's see if I can just figure out while it's down. So I'll grab this tunnel IP and I'm just going to download this configuration again. So generic.
Is it because your public IP changed?
I really hope not, but let's find out, because that will be bad if it is what's causing it. So curl check p.amazon aws.com 120, 148, 28, 133.
No, that looks okay.
No, still looks okay. So let's go back to site-to-site VPN. And I'm just going to make sure that's set up correctly. 192.168.1.24. 10.0.0.16. We've got two tunnels. I've got this here. I'm just going to check and make sure that the tunnels are set up with the right IP address, because I've been playing around with lots of tunnels this morning. So let's have a look at I'll just bring up my latest download, because I'm going to need that pre-shared key. So I'll jump back into my router, find this tunnel, and just going to modify it right now. So it should be that IP address. That looks correct. I'll confirm the settings here. That looks correct. And IP address on the remote side looks correct. Local side looks correct. I'll just grab the pre-shared key again. And just like noting that both pre-shared keys actually sit in the same file. So make sure you grab the right pre-shared key, like the one that associates to the first tunnel. Or if you try and sort of mix up the IP addresses and the wrong pre-shared key, then you're never going to actually be able to establish a connection. So the other thing to know is that I'm just going to make sure my route tables are correct too, and I'm routing traffic to the right IP address. So yeah, that looks correct. 10.0. So only the client side can establish a connection through to an EC2 instance or a resource on the AWS side. So to establish the tunnel initially, it has to be established from the client side, not the AWS side. So generally enabling keeper lives establish the tunnel, because it'll try and connect to something on the AWS side, but I'll just see if I can try and get through to this IP address. Oh, the joys of live demos. It was working perfectly like an hour ago.
Have you ever? Is it because there's two tunnels? Like I didn't even really think about it. Like so, it's definitely worked before with two tunnels.
Well, no, it's actually pinging now. So like you saw when I started the ping, it was failing, but now it's actually just started responding.
Oh, the tunnel might have come up.
Yeah, so the tunnel generally has to be established from the client side, and if there's no interesting traffic, it would just like drop the connection. Like keeper lives. So if you go to, hopefully, I thought I configured keeper lives, but let me just make sure I did. So I'll go back to. So I can see now that the site-to-site VPN tunnel is actually showing up on the Cisco side. And if I go back to the VPN tunnel side, just make sure I'm in the right region again, I should now actually have the tunnel up, or it looks like tunnel 2 has come up, not tunnel 1. But, as long as one of the tunnels are up, then, traffic should flow through, right? So it looks like I've got a connection. So if I've got a connection through to an instance on EC2, hopefully the network load balancer will also have a connection back through to my Raspberry Pis. So if I go back to target groups, and it looks like all of my Raspberry Pi connections are actually coming up as healthy now. So if I flick back to this load balancer, and I need to get out of target groups, and if I go to my load balancer, I think it'll be this one here, WordPress LB, and I'll just chuck the DNS name into a browser. Hopefully it'll come up correctly. So that should hopefully bring up a WordPress site. And
are you going to put it in the chat so everybody can load up your Raspberry Pi?
Let's do it. Don't overload my Raspberry Pis though, especially if there's any potential. All right.
Yeah, we I think last time we're like, don't overload like Paul's end, and then like literally the entire day, like Paul shared this URL to basically turn a motor on and off. It was just going on, off, on, off, on, off like the entire day.
It handles it really well, but it was just annoying because I could hear the relay clicking on and off.
Yeah.
Well, you can actually, like, if you get close enough to the rack, you can actually hear the fans spinning. So if I hear the fans wear up, I've actually got a section in the documentation about how to set the fan speed based on the temperature. But if I get close enough, you can hear the fan spin. So if the fan starts spinning, I'll know that someone's trying to hack my Kubernetes cluster. If you can cause enough traffic on there. So I've got the Raspberry Pi connection going up through here, and then I should be able to grab the other load balancer. So the other one was a classic. So the classic one here is going to be my other WordPress deployment going on to my EKS cluster. So I'll put that into a browser. Hopefully that's the right one. So I've now got this one here, which is running on my Raspberry Pi, and this one here that's running on my EKS cluster. And I'll just put that in the chat, but I've actually just created like a better solution. So if you go back to this diagram, I've used this Route 53 component to like flick between the two of them. So what I've done is I've just created in Route 53, if I just show you this window. So if I go to hosted zones, and I've just registered my lastname.com.au, and I've created like 3 entries for this WordPress deployment. So I've got wordpress.trapesky.com, and that one there is the weighted record set that flicks between the classic load balancer and the network load balancer. And I've also just created 2 entries here. So for Raspberry Pi.wordpress, and I think this other one is AWS-WordPress. So that's just seeing that both of them are individually working. So if I put this one into a browser, and I'll just pop all of these into the chat too. So if I put that into the browser, hopefully that will load the AWS side of this cluster. If I jump back to Route 53, I'll grab the Raspberry Pi DNS string. Although that's not
so
going to
this
give me
is
the whole
running
string.
so WordPress is running on premise or in the cloud. However, the database is running in AWS. So they're both connected to the same database. If you made a post change, you would expect to see
it would both work,
content on both places. Yep.
So I've created those 2 entries, and if I just use the wordpress.trapesky.com.au, that will go to both. So if I just shove this into I'll just put this into the chat too, so everyone can follow along. So that's going between both right now. So if I was going to say jump onto the Raspberry Pi one, and got to remember how to actually do a post on WordPress. I don't think anyone's actually used WordPress for anything other than demos for a few years. So if I was
Devs in the Shed blog is using WordPress. It's /wp-admin, and then you need the admin password. If you know what the admin password is, you can get in, but otherwise.
My one is always password. So as long as you remember that the password is password, you'll be able to get into my WordPress website. All right, let me see if I can figure out how to do a post, or at least comments on a post. No, that definitely wasn't the right link. All right, let me see if I can comment on this one. Okay, so if someone else can leave me a comment. So I'll just say, in the spirit of not bashing WordPress, and I don't have any details, so hopefully this pre-populates some details for me. Don't know why it thought. All right, let's see if we can leave a post. And hypothetically, right, so I've still got this post. So if I went and destroyed some stuff now, so if I went to, say, for example, if I just said, like, let's just jump onto the Kubernetes cluster and destroy some stuff. So if I go back to make sure I'm in the right directory. So just zoom in a bit. kubectl, just bring that up so I can actually make sure I'm on the right cluster. Cluster-info. Just make sure I'm on the right cluster. So I'll jump over to my EKS cluster. So AWS EKS. And I'll just make sure I'm on the right cluster again. So if I go to, say, for example, I'll just do kubectl get or minus namespace have. And if I, for example, if I just destroyed this load balancer, oh, actually that's not going to work. I won't destroy the load balancer because it's got a Route 53 association. That'll fail miserably. If I delete the deployment, so if I just said kubectl delete space -f WordPress. Actually, make sure I'm in the right directory. That'll help a bit.
I don't know if this will work exactly the way we think, because that comment's on the moderation, so you won't see it. You'd have to log into WordPress backend to enable that comment to be able to see it replicated.
Okay. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe I'll need a better example, but that's okay because I can still I can still destroy this environment. So that at the moment is working. And then this one, so if I go to WordPress, that one should also be working. And then this Raspberry Pi one, hopefully that's also working. So I'm just going to destroy the AWS side and see if I can still get that to fail over to the right directory, or fail over to the WordPress deployment that's running on the Kubernetes. Delete space -f WordPress.yaml. So hopefully that just always forget to put the namespace. No, that shouldn't actually. Why does that need to? I know what's going on. Sorry. I should have used Helm instead of just hard baking namespaces into the file. That should be the moral of the story. Always use Helm instead of kubectl files. So I want to delete that. Delete space -f WordPress. All right, let's see if I can delete that.
It'll just
That
backspace.
may be beyond my
Siri's unsure, but I'm sure you'll be able to do it.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that Siri, I don't know, maybe Siri can delete some Kubernetes stuff. So that should be terminating now. So hopefully that starts to fail. So the load balancer should still be in there. But I think now if I go through to the AWS side of this deployment, it should be well and truly failed by now because there's no pods running behind it. So I'll get a bit of spinning before it times out. The Raspberry Pi should hopefully still be functional. And if I go through to this main link now with the Route 53 weighted record set, I should hopefully still have, although I haven't configured health check, so hopefully this works the way that that can't be good. I probably shouldn't have used the 50-50 weighted.
You got
Hopefully
a 50-50 chance of that working, right?
Yeah, it worked for me.
50-50.
Yeah.
Well, half the people on this live stream are going to get 404s and half the people are going to get a functional WordPress deployment. But if I had actually done things properly and configured health checks on my weighted record set, it should still be working. Let me just see if I've actually... Yeah. So there's a few morals to this story, is always configure health checks too. But that should hopefully come back online. Wow, the joys of live demos. That one's failed. This one should still be working. And this one, 50-50 chance. Although 50-50 chance is turning out quite bad for me. Hopefully it's still working for everyone else in the group. But yeah, if you had health checks correctly, that should be failing over to the proper one. But that's kind of like the gist of the whole thing, is that like it should, if you configure all your health checks properly, and if you're doing this properly, you would probably use something like CloudFront in front of it instead of just using Route 53 weighted records. But that's the whole premise, is you've basically got, you know, some applications running here, some applications running here, and then you can fail over between the two, hopefully properly. Oh, there we go. Oh no, that's the wrong window. Just wanted one that would work properly. Wonder what I've done wrong here. Maybe let me just type that in.
It's definitely not working for me either.
I can show it on my side working. I definitely have it working here, but it will be the health check. I was going to say, one of the things I like about the solution in particular is, you know, like we're playing around with WordPress today. We're running on a Raspberry Pi. Like we've got it stretched between like a cluster on AWS and what, you know, like instances running on the Pi as well. But I've seen a number of customers that like actually implement this type of thing when they're doing an on-premise migration to cloud, and they've got a multi-stage, you know, like migration. So they might be using RDS. Some of their application might be hosted in cloud. That have site-to-site VPN set up, or that have direct connect to on-prem, and the pieces of the app that haven't migrated just yet will be using an approach that's kind of similar to this, right? And then they'll slowly migrate those pieces when they've done the work into the cloud as well. So it's kind of where I think, like, you know, as a TAM, I've definitely seen like multi-step migrations where I've seen these types of implementations during a migration.
Yeah, it's definitely better when live demos work. But yeah, like the whole premise was kind of...
There we go.
I just respun up the service on the EKS side again.
Yeah.
Although it's probably a good thing to do to see if I can figure out how to kill off just, you know, for the sake of arguments, let's test both sides and see what fails when I kill off the other side. But if I, for example, if I just went to the Cisco router and I said, you know what, just like drop the VPN connection. Then hopefully if I go back to, I have a feeling this will do the exact same thing on the other side. So if I go back to the load balancers, just go load balancer. And then find the right network load balancer. And hopefully that's now failing to some unhealthy targets, although it does take a little bit of a while to fail. Oh, there we go, starting to fail. So now the AWS side of the deployment should still be okay. The Raspberry Pi side of the deployment should be dead.
Yep. Yeah, it's spinning.
Okay, so we got some spinning. Now this is the scary part. Let's do this part and see if it loads. Hey, at least it's an equal opportunity failing solution.
Nice.
So I've created a solution with less redundancy than just running on either EKS or Raspberry Pis independently. It actually kind of fails on both if either fail. So, it's clearly a good solution.
That's you would just need to set up DNS correctly to determine which your endpoint is going down. So you can leverage Route 53 or as a DNS provider to effectively do like load balancing, but basically balance between the two healthy stacks, and it won't move traffic to an unhealthy stack.
I think if you wanted to do this properly, you probably should set up health checks properly so that it actually does a proper failover, or use something like CloudFront. But yeah, if you've got DNS configured correctly, unlike me, then you should have a pretty handy way to fail over between the two solutions. But that's pretty much what I just wanted to show you. But I'll just flick off my screen sharing. But all the code's pretty much in the repository. So if you want to go and build something yourself and just like play around, actually, the first time I did this, just to save some money, if you don't want to spend all 3 Raspberry Pis, you can actually do the whole thing with just a single Raspberry Pi and VMware Fling, which is free at the moment. So, I think you get a free sort of 12-month license or something like that. And all you really need is just like an SD card to boot up VMware, and then a USB stick to run VMware on, and then a second USB stick to run the virtual machines on. So it probably costs you a little bit more than, just running a single Raspberry Pi, but it's way cheaper than having 3 separate ones. So you can still do the whole thing with less kit. And as you said, if you do actually do this on VMware too, you could potentially have StrongSwan running on like a virtual machine on the same Raspberry Pi as what your Kubernetes cluster is. You'll probably start to run out of memory at some point though. If you're running all three VMs and the StrongSwan deployment on a single Pi. But look, it'll definitely work. It'll just be super, super slow.
There's the VPN cost, like that was asked last time. It wasn't that expensive. I forgot to not jot down the exact cost, but if you're just experimenting and playing like at home, the cost isn't as expensive as you think. And obviously, if you're building a solution that requires this, then you're probably less likely to be concerned about that specific cost. But it would, if people would be interested in that, maybe one day we could configure StrongSwan. I know you've done it a few times, Lupcho. Like it'd be interesting to go through how you do it. And you don't need to have a Raspberry Pi to do it. Like I've bought like really cheap old laptops with like 4 gigs of RAM, and you can do it on a cheap $20 laptop. It'll work just fine.
Yeah, I used to have an HP microserver, which is really nice as well. Like N40L and 38L, I had like a couple of those babies. But like you can use anything that's old lying around. That's fine as well. I like the microservers because I could like whack in 32 gigs of RAM back in the day, which was a lot back then. So like, a really great solution. I can see Mickey Monkey was joking around in the chat as well. Needs a few layers of extra complexity and then just joking. So that's cool. Live demos are always fun, but I think we saw some pretty good legit stuff that I do see with customers every day, right? When they perform very, very complex migrations, they generally have to work in this type of state where they've got things stretched from VPN to AWS as they migrate components off. So I really like that aspect. And like the VPN solution is actually quite cheap when we did look at it last time, as Max Payne mentioned. But one of the great things about working at AWS is we don't have to check the bill out as much sometimes. we're still very frugal, right? Like our managers will walk up and say, get your costs down if we're spending a few $100. But very, very cool.
There is actually a cheaper way to do this too. So I've in this solution, I've used a transit gateway and a VPN connection, and the transit gateway is actually kind of has its own associated costs, and then the VPN connection has a cost. But I've got another version of this template where it's just the same CloudFormation template, but instead of using a transit gateway, I just use a virtual private gateway and a site-to-site VPN connection. And if you don't need the benefits of the transit gateway is you can literally attach it to thousands of VPCs. And I've got 5 different AWS accounts, and I connect all of those accounts through to the same transit gateway. But if you just want to create a one-to-one connection between a single AWS account and a site-to-site VPN connection, don't use a transit gateway. Just use a site-to-site VPN connection, and I think it's about $30 a month. But you only pay for connected hours. So if you just connect it for an hour or two so you can play around and then disconnect it, or just leave it so it automatically disconnects when there's no traffic, you're only paying for the hours that you're going to use. You might get some drop packets when it's reestablishing the connection, but it's going to cost you a fraction of $30 a month.
Nice, very nice. Well, I know we're out of time, so what we might do is we might wrap things up. Paul and myself have some pretty exciting things queued up for the next couple of weeks, so come join us at the same time. Greengrass is one, if that all goes smoothly. That might be next week or the week afterwards, depending on how we go. And the other projects that we've got on with our customers. I've got an EC2 macOS demo where I basically have a Mac build server that I just access through SSH. So that's something that I'd be very excited to show the audience. We can VNC into it as well if you want to see macOS running in the cloud. But for build servers, you can do everything end to end with Xcode or through just the command line, which is really cool. So there needs to be a Mac demo, 100%, right? I've been doing it a ton. I've literally spent probably half my last couple of weeks on macOS EC2. So we've got those lined up. We also have a conversation with the Amplify team as well, and we're going to have a look at Flutter. So some of the folks in Australia have been really liking using Flutter as a language. I've helped out with a new workshop that's coming up, so we'll go through that too. So we've got quite a few things coming for Christmas. And you might have seen the Pico from Paul beforehand. We've got some merch coming up and some special December, IoT episodes coming as well, which is going to be really cool. So you can see our Christmas tree there. Yeah. So hang with us, same time each week. If you can't make it, it's on Twitch. You can watch the restream for 14 days afterwards. But you can also subscribe to us on YouTube as well, as Paul put into the chat, and then that way you can watch in your own time, and we kind of use that as a space to archive each of the episodes, so you can kind of go through things that you're interested in at any time. But thanks for coming on, Lupcho. It was awesome. Enjoyed having you show off the solution that you've got there. And what we'll do is we'll kill the stream now, hang around, and we'll talk to you for 5 minutes afterwards, but we'll say bye to everyone else. So hope everyone has a great week, and catch you next week.
Thanks for inviting me on.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.